Serious, family court lawyers, what's the most petty behavior you've seen from parents? When I was in law school I worked on a case involving the parents of a victim of Sandy Hook. They were divorced prior to losing their child but were still fighting over child support several years later. They were fighting over who got to keep the victim's compensation fund proceeds for the death of their 6-year-old. They were insanely rich, so it wasn't about the money. It was about getting a win over their former spouse. It wasn't so much petty that they were fighting over it, but the way they were fighting over it. Using the death of their baby to score points against that baby's other parent, and the other children were stuck in the middle of this crap show. Incredibly petty but much more depressing than anything else. Worst case I've ever worked on. I'm just an intern, but I once was sifting through discovery that our client provided as he was trying to win custody over his son. One of these pieces of discovery was a detailed account of the mother's timeliness. Basically, if the mother was late to pick up her son, they would time it and document it, which would make sense if it was significant. But I'm not exaggerating. Over a 6-month period, she was late for a total of 33 minutes. Seeing as they met to exchange the child 3 times a week, it means she was late by about 1 or 2 minutes once a week. It was the most insignificant piece of data that I have ever seen in my entire life, but the client was adamant that we use it in court to prove that the mother was irresponsible. Family law legal assistant here. A client of ours included a chunk of pork in the freezer in her list of assets that she insisted she get back. The lawyer on the other side came back with respectfully, "I'm not going to argue over second-hand meat in a freezer." My GF is a family lawyer. She had a pair from Eastern Europe, we're in Ontario, who wanted a divorce. Long fight over what the husband's assets were. He claimed to be living on less than $12,000 cash a year. Wife hired a private detective. Eventually found that he was hiding another home. Won a big settlement. My GF is really happy. Note, she doesn't get a penny of the settlement or bonus or extra pay. She just liked seeing the lower court. But the wife still isn't happy. Claims the husband is hiding even more money. Keeps badgering him with more legal stuff. Even though my GF is telling her you won, let it be. Then, husband hires a pie. Finds out the wife is joint owner of another house with her new boyfriend. Settlement invalidated. My GF immediately got off the record and refused to help the woman anymore. Worked in an attorney's office for a little bit. Knew about a divorce case one of the attorneys was involved in where the child had been diagnosed with a terminal disease with maybe a few years left, and the parents tried to fight over what the child's wish should be for one of those make-a-wish type of foundations. I do know the judge chewed both parents a new one when this issue came up, but ultimately could not make a call on how the wish would be granted. I believe the child ending up refusing the wish on account of the argument it caused between the parents. Just hearing about the details of this case fricked me up for a while. Not really petty but more psychotic. My dad received full custody and won everything in the divorce because my mom was diagnosed with a multitude of mental problems that she refused to take medication for, and she was an abusive alcoholic who also did M for funsies. Anyways, after all that was said and done, she decided she'd show us. When we were gone she'd break into the house and steal random crap like Tupperware lids. All of the Tupperware lids. I crap you not. We came home from school and all of the forks were gone, so we went to Walmart and bought forks. Came home with forks and all of the spoons were gone. We found out she'd been getting in through my bedroom window, so we put a lock on the window and put up security cameras. Didn't work out because 3 days later while we were gone we got her on video stealing. Yes, actually stealing the window and running down the road. Before you ask, yes, we have a restraining order. Yes, we turned the tapes over to the cops. No, you can't have a crazy person put into a mental hospital against their will unless they are a physical threat to themselves or others. Yes, she still randomly steals stuff from my dad's house. It's more of an amusement now though. You always decorate the tops of your cabinets with stuff and forget about it, so we play this game called What Used to Be There. $3,000 between me and another very good lawyer to argue about $13 month versus $30 month child support. They had 50/50 custody. The kid was 13. Even after I did the math for my client explaining they were paying me more than the difference for the entire rest of child support, they still wanted to do it. When I was a kid and my parents were divorcing, My dad filed many lawsuits against my mother for anything and everything. When I was 10 years old, he even told me he was going to take me to court in a lawsuit because I didn't want to go visit him. Client once called me with an emergency. The emergency was that his soon-to-be ex-wife fed the kid Chef Boyardee for dinner. I went to law school for this. The interim court order said that my client, the mom, was not to discuss the court proceedings with the child. During an access visit, the child asked her, "When will I get to see you again?" and my client responded, "We'll have to see, but hopefully soon." The father then argued that this was discussing the court proceedings with the child and tried using it as an excuse to deny any further access. As an intern, I saw a couple have long, hateful emails about who was going to keep a unisex Armani hoodie. Almost all of their discussion centered on that one hoodie. When in the end the husband got to keep it, the wife cut holes into it which ruined it. It was pretty nice tbh. What I get from this is that if you ever divorce someone really petty, put a lot of focus on a few random items you don't actually care about. A mother actively coaching her 2 kids to say that dad was physically and sexually abusive to them. She would have gotten away with it except for 2 things. 1. The court-appointed psych managed to catch these lies out in the interview. To date, longest report I have read at 280 pages. And 2. The oldest kid, then 10 I think, got annoyed at the mother for some such reason and recorded her on their cell phone, which was promptly played for dad. In the end, dad got full day to daycare and mother had supervised contact for 6 months before she went to every second weekend. This happened in January. Guy was straight out of jail, 2 years, and of course at that point, his marriage was rocky as heck. When his wife dropped his kids off to visit, he lived with his parents for parole purposes. The son said his uncle hit him. The father then filed a PFA against the wife and uncle. It was granted. Then he files for sole custody. It was granted. The kids were in his custody for about 2 months before the custody hearing. Of course, my boss threw me the file and I had to handle the mediation and last-minute prep. At mediation, the father and wife sit angry-eyed. Literally, each cross-armed and furious. The other lawyer and I discuss the facts and what arrangement each client wants briefly in another room. We come out and our clients are gone. Magically, and praise the Lord. In the course of 10 minutes of me and the lawyer talking, the father and mother made out in the corner of the hallway and returned. The case was dropped. May I mention, this was pro bono, PA jurisdiction. 2. Repeatedly taking the kids to CPS and trying to get them to accuse a teenager of rape. Every medical record makes it clear that the mother was the only one doing any talking. What's worse, she was a social worker trained to interview child sex victims professionally. So many I don't know which to choose. A father once called me because his ex-wife was planning to take their daughter to Disney World. He said he was concerned she might decide to stay there and he wouldn't know how to contact his daughter. Right? It's not because your kid might have fun with mom. It's because of the epidemic of people who just don't come back from Disney. Sounds legit. A mother, who had, for good cause, lost custody of her children for the foreseeable future, wouldn't let them retrieve their clothes and stuff from her house because, she claimed, she would never get it back. A dad, who made 90% of the parents' combined income, tried to get the court to force mom to pay her 10% share of their teenage son's car insurance costs, because reasons. I did the math. Her share came out to less than $25 per day. This after she had to go to court to get him to pay his share of the kids' educational expenses. I've lost track of how many times I've seen a parent tell the judge they'd rather pay the cost of a babysitter than let the child spend more time with the other parent who was willing, able, and eager to watch the kid. Of course they always want the other parent to pay their share of the babysitter cost, too. Of course. Another popular one. Divorce seems to be the leading cause of very successful businesses suddenly and mysteriously tanking. Business is great. What's that? My ex might be entitled to a portion of my business? Oh, this business ain't doing so good no more. The economy, you know, tough times. The worst I was ever a part of. In California we have certain requirements to meet before one parent can move away with the child. These requirements kick in when the other parent's visitation will be materially impacted by the move. My client is mom. She is a dental hygienist. She has kids with dentist 1 and divorces dad for dentist 2. She wants to move with the kids to dentist 2's town so she can work for him, live closer to work, etc. Dentist 2's town is a 25-minute drive away from dentist 1's town. 25 minutes. Between the two of them, the two dentists must have spent nearly $400k fighting over a 25-minute move. This was also the moment I realized I made a terrible mistake becoming a lawyer when I should have become a dentist. My first job out of law school was as a trial court staff attorney. This is basically a judicial law clerk, so we did a lot of research and advisory memos for judges. I didn't cover a family law docket, but my office mate did. She got an emergency motion in a family law case one time. For the non-lawyers, these are filed when something is extremely time sensitive and critically, like a matter of life and death, important. If the judge deems it a true emergency, your matter will be heard on an expedited basis. They'll fast track you in for a hearing, usually in a matter of days, rather than the usual weeks months it normally takes to get a hearing date. Anyhow, this particular emergency motion was to compel the ex-spouse to send their child to Happy Faces Daycare, because if the child couldn't go to Happy Faces Daycare, it was going to be irreparably damaged from the lack of social exposure, etc. Emergency. Happy Faces Daycare, FML. Needless to say, this was not an emergency. I don't know how the motion was ultimately ruled on, other than that it wasn't an emergency. Probably the case where a woman sexually assaulted her toddler daughter. Digital penetration. In the bathroom of a supervised visitation center. I guess her plan was that the child would see dad and start complaining about the pain. Not very smart though. As I said, it was all supervised. Yes, she lost custody. That, or fighting over a fuzzy blue couch. That's less petty and more psychopathic. Canadian family lawyer here. Many instances of pettiness. Generally, good family lawyers will call their client on their BS. We don't want to be the lawyer standing in front of a judge over really petty things. Reputation is important. Client. My son is very mature for his age. I believe access to his mother should be per his discretion. Me. Your 2-year-old son. That said, I've had people call my office yelling that my client wouldn't allow them to pick up the infant child at 10 p.m. Only 4 hours late for a visit. One guy fired 2 previous lawyers and retained me to negotiate adding 3 meaningless words to a settlement. We're talking months of intense negotiations between counsel. One parent refused to allow another parent to take kids on vacation because they wanted to take the child to Disney first, despite, not having the funds to do so. The most petty are the parents who phoned CPS, Child Protection Services, or the police for every minor disagreement. Your 2-year-old cries when leaving your home, call Child Protection Services. One guy was a total control freak. He'd gone to the Philippines and romanced his now ex-wife, brought her back to Australia and then expected her to be a slave for him, pop out his kids, etc etc. When she left him, he manipulated her into believing that they would share care of the kids, and they didn't need court orders. Then behind her back he went to court, obtained sole custody of the kids and basically cut her out. Then when she was back on her feet and could finally go back to court and try to get her kids back, he said she was a prostitute, among other things. He said the kids were learning inappropriate behavior from her, despite the fact that he was living in a trailer caravan modified shipping container, something like that, with no actual walls between the kids' room and the bedroom he shared with his new partner. And the mother was living in a house with bedrooms and doors. Real nice guy. In the end, he didn't use a lawyer, so he was completely steamrolled in court. His court documents were laughable. Literally everything that had ever gone wrong with the kids was the mother's fault, and he now sees the kids once a fortnight instead of having them live with him full time. So there's a way not to do things. Also, hilariously, one of the things he said in court was that he knew when he was impregnating the mother, because he can control his ejaculation. Right. As an intern in law school I saw a case where the father was likely going to get an unfavorable custody and support arrangement, so he claimed the mother was unfit. His basis? She's into kinky stuff and has a new boyfriend. He insisted on telling the court specifically what she likes in bed, even though he admitted that the children never saw or were subjected to any of these acts. He did it just to embarrass the mother. I've seen some crazy pettiness, but the best story I have is actually from my guardian ad litem professor. When she was practicing, she had a client whose ex-wife was super duper anal about getting all of the children's clothes back from his house when she got the kids back from him. Like, if one sock was left behind, all heck would break loose. So this guy's solution was to make the children strip naked in the foyer and put on clothes specifically worn at his place when it was his turn to have them. Then when they went back to mom's, they had to strip naked again and change back into the clothes she sent them there in. In law school, I did some intern work for a family law clinic. Most of my clients were pretty reasonable, but when waiting for my cases to be heard in the hearing room, I saw some really petty and terrible crap from other parties. But one case stood out as the worst. One guy who got custody of the family dog in the divorce said that if he didn't get more visitation with the children, he would have the dog euthanized. His excuse was that without the kids there, the dog wouldn't get the attention it needed and was better off dead. The ex-wife made an impassioned plea before the judge, showing pictures of the kids playing with the dog and video testimony from the kids expressing their love for it. It was 100% clear they would be devastated if the dog was put down. While the judge was very sympathetic and tried asking the ex-husband to be reasonable, in the end her hands were tied, since the dog was the ex-husband's property per the divorce agreement, and he was free to do whatever he wanted, provided it comported with state anti-cruelty laws. In the end, she relented to give him custody rights basically every weekend of the month in order to save the kid's dog. To the judge's credit, she gave the ex-husband a verbal haranguing like I've never seen in all my years of practicing law since. She warned him that she would be watching this case very closely and would not hesitate referring it to a criminal prosecutor if he slips up in any way either towards the treatment of the dog or the kids, and that if anything happens to that dog, she would fast track a hearing to revisit his visitation rights, and strongly implied the new visitation schedule would be vastly against his favor should that come to pass. On that day I realized I never wanted to be a family lawyer. Father wanted full custody of his child. Child was in full mother's custody. Child has diabetes. Both parents must fill a daily glucose intake measured by glucometer. Every time father dropped the child at mom's, he would buy a Snickers or Twix on the way there and feed it to the kid. Then we flipped out the glucose measurings during court. Due to the measurings being extremely high when the child was at mom's, we were able to get the child to the father's full custody. I didn't knew what he was doing. I certainly didn't advise him to do it. He just bring it to the courthouse and ordered me to present it. Either that or that time where during divorce a guy had exact knowledge of how many toilet paper sheets his wife was overusing and how many liters of warm water she overused. For my first job as an attorney, I clerked for a state court of appeals. An appellate court reviews all manner of lower court decisions, including family law. Every single case that was sent to our court came with a case file that included all the actions that the trial court took in the course of a trial, a transcript of all court proceedings, and briefs by all concerned parties. And, most often, you could immediately know what kind of case you were handling, simply by the size thickness of that case file. Usually, criminal cases had the thinnest files 2-3 inches thick, a day or two of trial transcript, short briefs by the defendant and the state, and approximately 10-15 motions. Civil cases were a little thicker, because the frequent use of expert testimony made the trial and transcripts longer, and the lack of a constitutional right to speedy trial in civil cases allowed many attorneys to use procedural law and motions in a coercive manner, so there was a lot of paperwork. Read Rainmaker. Usually, the parties' briefs included a few more issues than you'd find in a criminal case. Altogether, 5-6 inches thick. This was a death penalty state, and we did have many such cases. These were serious felonies, and trials took a couple of weeks, so very thick transcripts. Many required constitutional steps, and required a separate trial for sentencing. These case files were maybe 12-15 inches thick. Then there were the divorce cases. Appeals are not mandated in divorce cases, so my court only saw those divorce cases where the fighting between the ex-spouses couldn't be resolved satisfactorily by the divorce court. In other words, at least one ex wanted another opinion chance at winning. These case files took up drawers. These case files were measured in feet, not inches. The largest files were those where children were involved. In other words, These people wouldn't co-parent, and so had to run back to the trial court for nearly every single disagreement. Where and how to school, feed, clothe, practice religion, conduct extracurricular activities, etc. Repeatedly renegotiating child support, repeatedly trying to change custody or visitation orders, trying to control how the other parent managed his or her time with the child. And every single one of these court proceedings cost money, lots of money. I handled one case where the father didn't want the mother to give the child multivitamins. Hundreds of dollars in attorney fees over a Flintstone chewable. These fights were really rarely about the kids, they were attempts to control the ex-spouse through the kids. And what these litigants never realized is that, by refusing to co-parent, they essentially were giving over their parental role to the judge. In their efforts to control one another, they lost all power and control. I'm not a lawyer, I just worked for one. One case involved a family, 3 kids aged 2 to 10. The father was being accused, rather suddenly, of abusing his children. The mother brought suit against him for this. I got to read a psychologist evaluation of the whole thing. It was long and I only half remember it, so I'll try to keep it short. The father was surprised, to say the least, and the mother was rather hostile. The children did mention stories of abuse, and indicated to CPS that they were being abused in one-on-one sessions. The mother was described as having many detailed stories of the abuse, the how, the why, the when. The maternal grandmother was also apparently helping her with these. Some of her descriptions were painful, going as far as to detail how the father abused his naked 2-year-old daughter while changing her diaper. The mother apparently also had a history of abuse as a child and was working night shifts that stressed her out a lot recently, but didn't want to change this. The father's evaluation was shorter. He appeared like a deer in headlights and didn't understand his wife's sudden shift in tone. He only came to terms with the full consequences much later in the proceedings. The children themselves were evaluated during visits with their respective parents, noting that the mother was extremely controlling in the presence of the supervisor and would reprimand in ways that were ineffective. The father's time with the children was much warmer, more natural. He was able to redirect the children to behave without any punishment or reprimands. With one-on-one time with the children, they indicated signs of abuse. Though it's interesting how they have to do things with very young children. The psychologist did not get the impression that these indications were genuine, and that they were coached. The psychologist's conclusion gave the impression that the mother and maternal grandmother were coaching the children into indicating their father was abusive. The conclusion was mostly that the children should immediately be placed in custody with their father. The mother would get visitation rights, but not custody. The CPS report indicating abuse was a false positive due to the use of leading questions and other techniques which were not accurate. This report more or less cemented the father's position as sole caretaker, as it became clear the mother had concocted his story. I don't remember the exact motives or reasons, just that it was generally unpleasant and taught me a lot about how far parents would go. Worked in a law firm dealing in family matters. Couple hammers out a separation agreement over months of meetings, mediation, letters and drafts back and forth. Ended up having to take it to court because they couldn't agree on who would get the air miles. The fricking air miles. I am an assistant to a family attorney, and Jesus Christ, people are petty buttholes. Both men and women equally. By the way, I would say the most frequent is not allowing the other parent to take the kids to Disneyland or to visit their grandparents out of state. Literally going to court to prevent them from doing that. It happens so much. They don't care about whether or not the child has fun, they just want to sabotage the other parent for moving on. Some people just can't let go of their exes, even if they are the ones that left. Kids are just tools for revenge. The revenge they want is for their offspring to resent the other parent as much as they do. I realize that family law is such a huge industry because there are so many petty buttholes and all-out psychos that exist. The funny thing is that if these people are your friends and co-workers, you would just never know how they are with their families. Not everyone is as chill as they seem. Client's spouse of decades gets a terminal cancer diagnosis about halfway into a fairly routine medium-high asset divorce. My client is such a viciously horrible person, saying they were glad that the spouse was dying, that the opposing party's literal dying wish is to be divorced and never see a spouse of 30+ years again. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.